The Woodsman is watching you. Written and narrated by Ladyspookariya. And featuring Creepy Oz, Papa Scare, and Punch Monster Studios. My grandfather had a cabin deep in the forest. He would often become stressed and angry if he stayed in the city for too long. Cities or suburbia, it didn't matter. Being around so many people would exhaust him. Nightmares would plague him, and my grandmother knew it was time for him to get away. She would tell him it was time for him to go into the wild for a while. She mentioned he would protest when he was younger, but by the time I was born, he knew to listen. Most of the time he would go alone, but occasionally, he would bring the rest of the family up there with him. Before they left, they would clean the house and make sure everything was clean for the house sitter to stay. There were never any issues with any of the house sitters. The cabin was remote, built by my great-grandfather, or maybe it was his father. Either way, it had been in the family for generations. Additions had been made in later years, with each person leaving their mark on the building. There weren't any luxuries. It was incredibly basic, but fortunately it had a toilet, shower, and water connected from a nearby spring, along with some kind of sanitation system. I'm not too sure how it works. When my grandmother married my grandfather, she insisted on this change. She preferred the convenience of city life, but tolerated these trips in order to make him happy. It wasn't always a happy place. My little brother drowned in the bathtub. I don't know why. My parents never let me take a bath afterwards. Showers only. My mother was severely unwell and went to live somewhere where she would be safe, apparently from herself. My father, taken in his grief, needed time away. I understood. I had my grandparents anyway. It was isolated. It was a place where people were not able to be seen for several days, weeks, or months even. My grandmother didn't mind the isolation too much, and used the extra time to reflect, write in her journal, and rest. When I went up there, I was told not to wander into the surrounding forests, for fear that I would get lost or attacked by some creature. I'd sit on the lawn and play with my teddy bears and other stuffed animals, making up fantasy worlds of their kingdoms and ways of life. At night we would sit at the campfire, where my grandfather told me tales of what used to live in the woods, and who to keep an eye out for. I listened, more fascinated than frightened, and I wanted to know everything. He took out a well-worn, bound leather journal, with faded writing down the sides. The paper was worn, yellow on certain pages and white on others. The handwriting was different, and I thought other people must have contributed to each page. There were sketches of a variety of beings, some human, others in between, and others who were closer to monsters from myth. He told me it was a family heirloom that had been lost and damaged, only to be violently reclaimed. Occasionally, I'd see yellow eyes from the darkness of the woods, and I was unafraid of them, even when they started to whisper my name, trying to lure me outside, and I would shake my head. I told my grandfather and he went into the forest. He was unworried, armed with a rifle and a long, sharp knife. My grandmother wasn't surprised and told me it was part of a family tradition. I shouldn't be worried. I heard her whistling one night and she sent me to bed early. I couldn't sleep. I was plagued with nightmares that wouldn't end. I heard noise coming from the back of the cabin and saw my grandfather coming home. It was dark. The glimpse I saw, he held a severed head. He held it by the hair, and the vacant eyes stared into nothing. The mouth open, and I hid under my blankets, scared. How could he do something like this? I hid in bed and didn't come out when the warm sun peered through my window. My grandmother came into my room with a warm breakfast. Toast, sausage, hash browns, bacon and eggs. It smelled delicious. I told her I saw him come home with a head. She told me I must have been dreaming, because he just came home this morning and that he would never kill a person. I accepted but ate breakfast in bed. I opened my bedroom door and saw my grandfather sitting in front of a warm fireplace. He gave me that warm, loving smile I knew. On his lap was the book. He was writing in it. Or rather, updating a section of it. "What are you writing?" My curiosity and desire to get a closer look caused him to close it. He put a hand on my shoulder and told me I wasn't ready to read what was in this book. Not yet, but someday I would be ready. He told me to go play outside while it was still light out, and I didn't hear any whispers of my name this time. All I could hear was the sound of the forest, the birds chirping in the distance, and the sway of the breeze. In the meat shed, a place where animals were butchered, I searched for any sign of the severed head. I'd seen animal bones before. They didn't frighten me, and there was some on the table. I never worked out what my grandparents did with the bones. I could smell the stale blood and salt used to preserve the meat. I ran my fingertips along the remnant, and I heard a faint murmur. I nearly missed the sound when I opened a basket and saw the severed head. It had been salted. The long dark hair had become matted. The skin was drained of blood, and yet the lips moved. It didn't notice me. Not at first. The teeth chattered, before the eyes caught sight of me and locked on mine. It stared into them. I will never forget the wild, feral look in them. They were yellow, cat-like, and I wondered what kind of a person this was. I felt my hands and my feet go numb. A burning moved down my spine, and I recognized whatever this was, deep in my soul. It told me to lift it up. I reached down with both hands and lifted the head up. The neck had been severed in jagged cuts, and the mouth moved on its own. It never blinked. The mouth kept moving, murmuring unknown words and phrases. I could see pointed black teeth. Whatever this was, it wasn't human, and maybe never was. I held it up as high as I could, arms trembling, and lowered it down to bring it close to my face. The smell of ash surrounded me, and I lost control over my body. Caught under the spell, I was ready to kiss those torn, twisted lips. The head was roughly yanked from my hands as I let out a wild scream. I hit the larger person with my fists, screaming at them that I hated them and to give it back. It was mine. The person took me by the shoulders, shook me roughly, and chanted strange words. My head swam. A battle raged inside my head, and the stranger won. The severed head's hold was shattered. I could see. I stared up at him. He looked like a younger version of my grandfather. He had a short cropped beard, a green plaid shirt, and well-worn jeans. I wouldn't have been surprised if he was more at home in the forest than he was around other people. He must have spent a considerable amount of time outdoors, and stared down at me with grey eyes. His weathered hand lifted my chin, gazed into my eyes, and studied them. Childishly, I thought he was trying to determine the color of my eyes. "My eyes are blue," I declared to break the silence. The stranger grumbled in return. Satisfied, he let go and walked back into the forest. I could have sworn he disappeared. I called out to him, asking who he was, and ran to where I last saw him. There were no signs of footprints. I stared in the direction he had left, and felt an unsettled feeling in my stomach, a telltale twist of warning. I ran back to the cabin as fast as my legs could take me, burst through the door, and ran into the kitchen. I looked through the window, waiting to see if this strange man would appear again.
"What are you looking at?"
my grandfather asked. I blurted out what had happened, rushed over every word, and practically yelled it at him. If we had been a different family, he might have played it down to a child's imagination, and instead he listened carefully. His smile was long gone. My grandfather's hand reached out to cup under my chin, to also look at my eyes. Why were they always looking at my eyes? "Why do you keep looking at my eyes?" I cried out, frustrated, and pulled away from him. He sighed to himself, rested a forefinger and thumb on either side of his face. Lines, showed the strain he was under.
I didn't want to tell you until you were much older.
He started.
Our family took up watching over this part of the forest as part of a pledge. Your great-great-great-grandfather was traveling in these woods, and he was rescued by a strange beast that spoke in false tongues, took the form of those he loved, and nearly cost him his life. The people saved him, took him back to their village, and taught him how to protect himself. Through smoke and ash, he gave his pledge that passed to his family, to watch over the lands. They let him go during the night, and he found his way back home. He kept his word, kept the forest safe. And there was a forest fire in the hills in the direction he'd come from. When the flames cleared, he took a couple of pack horses carrying supplies and went out to offer whatever assistance he could.
My grandfather sighed, took a breath, and continued with the grim tale.
When he arrived at the village, he saw it covered in smoke and ash. He found the villagers in pieces, desperately searched for any survivors of the attack. Their limbs, they'd been torn off with their torsos being carried off. The headless pieces frightened him until he came to the center of the village. The heads of every villager were placed on a pike around what was their campfire. Faces of people he recognized, people who had been kind to him. The law wouldn't care what happened to him, so, respectfully, he remembered their sacred words and buried them with respect. Then, leaving their village, never to return to the doomed site. We're told not to go there.
There was genuine fear in his voice. I listened to his story. A chill went down my spine, and I rubbed my arms to try to warm myself up. Okay, so, who is the man I saw? The one who came and helped me with the severed head? My grandfather was taken back. He closed his eyes and sighed. Again, forced to reveal yet another secret. He felt it was too early to tell me, but necessity demanded it.
The man is, well, was your father. He went...
My dad? I exclaimed. My mother never spoke about him. All she said was that he had an accident, and then God took him from us.
Yes. He isn't alive now. He is dead, but retains his memories and most of his morality. You're fortunate that he remembered who you were, because...
He stiffened, worried about how I would react to this news. I was more than thrilled that my father was alive. And, wait a minute, he's dead? And what would he have done? He exhaled, took my hand and led me to the porch of the shed. It gave a wide spanning view of the forest and the start of the tree line. He sat on the old creaky wooden seat and I moved to join him, ready for more of the story.
Not long after you were born, your father came out here to help me with the roof, and after dinner, he came out here for a beer to relax. He sat right where you are now and stared out. He must have seen something in the tree line, and he knew to be careful.
My grandfather paused. He looked older than his years.
Whatever he heard drew him out, and I called after him to come back. Days passed. There were no sounds or signs something bad had happened. Your grandmother and I couldn't escape the feeling that something had happened. On the third night, he wandered home again, stumbling around. His skin was practically grey, drained of blood. He couldn't speak. His clothing was torn. We brought him inside and he was lifeless.
He exhaled slowly. His wrinkled, weathered hands trembled as the memories awoke.
Over time, he regained his ability to speak and move. He was almost like a zombie. Not quite. He lost his spark, his soul. It was devastating to watch.
He said, sighed.
This was when you were still in the womb. Your mother and brother came up to stay with us, and there was a change. We were all tired, and so your father was giving your little brother a bath. And he drowned him.
It explained the sharp chill and the unsettling feeling that lingered in the bathroom.
He, your father, knew something in him had changed. There was no warmth in him. He apologized to your mother while she wept and left to go out into the woods. We see him on occasion and speak, but he never lets us get close. He doesn't want to hurt us.
I sat and listened. More things began to make sense. Given the short space of time, I wondered why my family decided to stay in a cabin that was close to so much tragedy for them. Why not move on?
Your mother couldn't cope with the loss of your brother and your father. The longer she was here, the more she heard the whispering of spirits. Some good and others wicked in the night. They told her to pluck you out of her and leave you in the forest for them to consume. They wouldn't stop, so we had to drive her away. The voices were never silent. They only grew quieter, momentarily.
We will cover her next. She's ours now. You can do nothing. She's ours. They will never believe you.
Please stop. You can't take my daughter too. They won't be quiet. They won't stop.
My stomach turned at the thought. It explained why my mother had to go to the hospital rather than raising me. Why are you two still here? After everything that has happened, why are you here? I demanded, angry this place had cost my family so much.
The woods must be watched,
He said, stood and went back into the cabin. My grandfather looked like he had aged from the draining lesson concerning our family history. I didn't know what to think. I looked through the tree line and saw the outline of my father standing in the woods, watching me. I waved at him excitedly, and when he didn't respond, my hand dropped to my side. My father jerked from one side to another. It reminded me of a puppet, and he returned my wave. I had a feeling he wanted me to approach him. This didn't feel like what I recognized from my father, in the limited experience I knew of him. I stood, scared to take my eyes off him, and back toward the door. I wanted to scream for my grandparents, my mouth open, and barely a gurgle came out. The weird version of father jerked from the tree line, coming toward me in a long lope on all fours, with a strange screech coming from its mouth. I froze, a frightened look on my face, terrified and stiff. It came close. It reached the bottom step. The skull had twisted to one side, with the skin pulled back, a large and terrifying mouth open, and I heard a loud shotgun boom. From behind the shed stood with a shotgun in hand, my undead father. He was reloading and shot the creature again. The bullet smelled different, and the blood smoked, burned as it ran off yelping. My father nodded and turned to walk away. Wait! Don't go. I know about what happened, but I don't care. Please.
Yes?
I could have sworn I saw his face soften. He walked toward me and stood by me, but just out of arm's reach.
Then you know why I must stay away from you, from your grandparents. I'm not alive. I never will be again. I'm in a strange limbo, and that means I can beat the monsters that lurk in the forest. This isn't your world yet.
I can help you.
You have. I can hear the whispers like your mother did. Only it is harder for me to stop. Please understand why it has to be like this.
He said. The more I looked at him, the more I noticed he looked dead now. The skin was grey, and his eyes had a coldness about them. He heard a noise in the tree line, stared at it, and for a while, I saw nothing. It was as though the ability finally began to seep through. I could see the shadowed silhouettes of people standing, watching, and my father handed me a knife.
Sometimes, the woodsmen don't just watch.
He said, walked to the shed and took out a rifle. It had been dipped in a strange liquid. Behind me, I saw my grandparents, each of them armed and ready for battle. I was home. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please check out my amazing guests, Creepy Oz, Papa Scare, and Punch Monster Studios. Each of them did an amazing job. This video is made with the support of my incredible channel members, Patreon subscribers, and all my viewers. Thank you so much for supporting me. Please check out all my links down below. Stay safe, my little spooklings. And remember, I'll be watching you.